Today I want to talk about Demonologist and how I beat insane roguelike difficulty with it. In the first part of the video, I'll go over all the Demonologist talents, and in the second one, I'll show you the specific character that I beat the game with and go more in depth about leveling, prodigies, gear, and so on. Demonologist is an unlockable class from the Ashes of Urarok expansion. It uses stamina, a basic resource, but also Vim, which goes down when you cast your talents, but only regenerates when you kill enemies. At first glance, Demonologist just looks like a normal melee class using a shield, but there's a lot more going on under the surface. Let's get into it with Demonic Pact and the Demon Seed talent. It costs both stamina and Vim, which is the case for a lot of Demonologist talents. It strikes the enemy with blight damage, and if it hits, it follows up with a shield strike, dazing the target. In addition, if the first attack hits, it implants a demon seed into the enemy, which then has a percentage chance to fully grow when the target dies, based on their rank. The more points you put into this talent, the more powerful demon seeds you can get. Alright, but what do they actually do? Well, let's look at Bind Demon, which is a spell that lets you summon a demon from your seeds to fight alongside you. From Flame Imps to Onilooks, all the way up to Champions of Urarok. But this is actually the least important part of the demon seeds, as a lot of these are not the best combatants and simply function as meat shields. What really makes the Demonologist an awesome class is that you can implant these demon seeds into your items, getting more slots as you invest points into this. And every different type of demon has different effects on your main hand, rings, offhand, and body armor. And these are not small uninteresting bonuses like plus 10 strength, most of these are talents, even build defining ones that will change the way you play your character. If you've played the Embers of Rage expansion, the way the system works will be very familiar to you, as the demon seeds are clearly the predecessor to Tinkers, which play a major role in that campaign. As you kill tough enemies, you will start amassing demon seeds in your inventory. This is the one thing that you need to be prepared for with this class. Your inventory will be a mess, but at least the seeds are filtered by the item slot they belong to. This means you have to find 4 seeds for each demon. You can't put a weapon seed into your armor, but at least there's a finite amount of them. If you find a level 10 Flame Imp main hand seed, and then later find a level 20 Flame Imp main hand seed, the seed will just upgrade itself, getting more powerful. Let's get into the specific effects, and there are a lot of them, so I'll just show off some of the more interesting ones so you can understand the possibilities. One of the early seeds you'll find gives you Corrosive Slashes, which is a sustain that turns all your melee damage into acid and gives you a lot of armor penetration. There are a bunch of synergies with this in the Demonologist's talents, but even with other seeds, like Acidic Bath for your body armor, which spawns a pool of acid around you, dealing damage to everything, but it gives you acid resist and even acid affinity, so the acid damage will actually heal you. Later you can also find Acid Burst for your offhand, which releases acidic vapors when you block an attack, dealing damage in a 3 radius. It doesn't deal too much damage, but can proc many times and it builds up quickly. So that's one way you could go. Then there are a lot of fire talents like Doom Tendrils, which is a sustain that deals fire damage in 2 radius every turn and pins enemies hit. You can combine it with Doomstorm for more AoE fire damage. Keep in mind you're not a mage, you will be in the middle of enemies with your shield up, outlasting enemies, so these overtime effects can do great work. But it's not all about obvious synergies, which would just make you pick the ones that deal the same damage type. There are a lot of standalone powerful options too. Like this later game seed, which can eventually give you up to 100% stun immunity. Or Blighted Path, which is a sustain that builds up charges as you move. You can then instant speed deactivate it to either restore Vim, deal blight damage, or create a shield based on the amount of charges. Maybe you're struggling with debuffs. Well, Fiery Cleansing deals 20% of your total life to you, but removes up to 6 of any debuffs from you. Then there are talents that let you weapon attack from range, pull enemies, reduce resistances, curse enemies on block, turn into an arcane blade, and much more. There are simply a lot of fun possibilities. What you could even do is use a one-handed staff instead of the usual weapon, because staves have much better item modifiers for things like non-physical damage and spell crit, stuff like that. You can learn the staff combat category in Angolven from the staff merchant. This will definitely require more game knowledge to make work than just going a normal weapon though. In the description, I'll link a forum post by Helmin Thauge that has all the demon seed information you would ever need, and even more about how Demonologist functions. You definitely don't need to look through all of this before playing this class, you can just play the game and have fun exploring the demon seeds as you find them, but it's still an amazing resource to have. So yeah, the demon seed mechanic is really awesome, and you will want to eventually max both of these talents to get the high tier demons and more slots. Moving on, there's Twisted Portal. This is a teleport, but it's not very precise unless you put a lot of points in it. It also summons a random demon in your original place, which could take a hit or two. Talents like Face Door are excellent because they only require generic points, but you're always a lot more tight on class points, so I think this is a 1-pointer at best and you hope you never have to use it. Doom Concordat is a passive that summons a random demon from your Worn Seeds when you enter combat. When they spawn, despawn or die, you get healed based on your spell power. So I wanted to like this, but the more I played, the more I started disliking this talent. It looks like just some free healing with a meat shield. What could be bad about it? Well, Demonologist really relies on a rush to get close to enemies, and if the demon spawns in front of you, you can't rush through him. It might seem like a very minor annoyance, but since the heal is pretty small, and you won't need the heal when the demon spawns, right? So it's only relevant when the demon dies. I don't think this is worth a point. Now let's go in order, starting with the fairly common shield offense. Shield Pummel hits twice with your shield, and if the second hit lands, it stuns. Stunning enemies is great, this eventually deserves a few points to increase the duration. Riposte is a passive improving counter-strike, which let's get a quick refresher on, since it's a very important mechanic for Demonologist. When you fully block damage, whether it's from an attack, or a spell, or a damage over time effect, you will apply counter-strike to the enemy, which makes the next melee attack deal double damage. It also reduces defense to 0, so you can hit any enemy and you get a big accuracy bonus. Block lasts for 2 turns, or turns off at the start of your turn if you blocked any damage. Back to Riposte, it lets you apply Counter-Strike even on incomplete blocks and makes Counter-Strike stay for more hits. On top of that, it also gives a lot of crit chance for Counter-Strike. This talent is simply excellent. With the help of the Eternal Guard Prodigy, which you're very likely to take, you can eventually block pretty much every turn, so most of your attacks will be Counter-Strikes. If you go for that, get this to at least 4 points for the extra Counter-Strike attack. Shield Slam hits 3 times with your shield, and then turns block on, ignoring its cooldown. This is how you keep your block up all the time. 1 point is probably enough. Assault hits with a shield, and if it connects, you follow up with 2 automatic crits with your weapon. This is your big damage talent, although it's not too synergistic with Counter-Strike since you get guaranteed crits out of this, but it's still great. Can be kept at just a single point though, because unlike spells, talents that scale with your weapon damage don't necessarily need points in them to stay relevant. It's more of a luxury in the late game. Next up is the extremely common combat techniques. Rush is an excellent mobility talent that benefits from extra points for the range, but can work just fine for 1. Precise strikes reduce your attack speed for accuracy and crit. A high price, usually not worth paying. Perfect Strike lets you hit annoying rogue type enemies with high defense and invisible mages or ghosts. Because of Counter-Strike reducing defense, you don't need many points in this. And Blinding Speed gives you global speed at instant speed. Acting more is good, I like maxing this. Combat Veteran is a very weak category, giving extremely minor regens to stamina and life. Despite Demonologist struggling with stamina a bit, it's not worth investing into. Now we get back to the fun categories. Shadowflame. Wraith form gives you a bit of armor and a bit of defense at instant speed. More importantly, it lets you move through walls. Just make sure you're not in a wall when it ends, because that will just make you randomly teleport, which could end up badly. I like this at a single point, and this functions as a sort of teleport. When you get surrounded in a tunnel, you can use this and a movement infusion to get out, so this can save your life. Darkfire is a projectile that explodes in a large AoE, dealing half darkness, half fire damage. This is a great talent, but in Demonologist, it's likely to just be a 1-point synergy enabler. Flame of Ururok is a sustain that costs 90 Vim, which is a lot, but it gives you resistances to fire, darkness, and up to 90% global speed. As you might have noticed by now, I do enjoy acting faster, so I think this deserves 5 points. You can't have enough speed on classes that use weapons, as you can always just auto-attack enemies. Fearscape lets you choose a target and teleport both of you to Hell, which deals fire damage to everything each turn. Thankfully, if you're using Flame of Ururok, you're a demon, so this heals you instead. The spell ends when either of you dies or you run out of Vim, which gets drained faster and faster the longer you sustain this talent. This is one of those talents that feel epic, and the idea is you duel the toughest enemy in Hell itself, but you usually just use this on a trash mob to heal and recharge your talents. I don't think it's worth many points, if any. The damage is not high enough, and you're stuck with a really scary enemy in a place where you can't run away. Infernal Combat. Flame Leash is a range 6 AoE pull to get those pesky mages after you use your rush. It doesn't really improve from more points, but it does its job well for a single one. Demon Blade is an instant speed talent which makes your melee hits trigger a small fire damage explosion once per turn. It's not too much damage, but it's damage and it's instant, but in the early game you struggle with managing stamina. You can put a point into it and autocast it when you're next to enemies once you feel stamina is not an issue. Link of Pain is another instant speed talent which lets you link 2 targets. When the first one takes damage, a percentage of it is redirected to the second one. Obviously you can link 2 enemies, but you can also always use this on yourself and on the unique you're fighting to reflect some damage back to it, although you'll often be blocking, which makes you take very little damage. I don't think this is a bad talent, but I struggled to put points in it. It feels like there's always something more important, so I think this is worth at most a few points at the very end. Demon Horns hits the enemy with your shield, causing it to bleed darkness damage over 5 turns. The real interesting part is that damaging the bleeding enemy in melee heals you, and the description is lying. It can happen as many times as you can attack, so probably 3 times at most with talents from the Shield Offense tree. So this is way better than it looks, and it's probably worth a point. But I have the same issue with this like with Link of Pain. I'm definitely not going to rush this. You might think the healing is important, but let me introduce you to the Doom Shield category and Osmosis Shield, which is a sustain which makes you heal for the first points of all damage you receive over 3 turns. The amount is a percentage of your shield block value. Okay, I know this might sound a bit confusing, and I'm only like 90% sure I know what it's actually doing, but I'm gonna try to explain it. Let's say this percentage shield block value is 30. You then get hit for 100 damage, which you take as normal, and it lowers your life. But then 30 also goes into Osmosis, which then heals you over 3 turns, so you'd also immediately get healed for 10. Then you take 300 damage next turn, and you get healed for 20. 10 from the Osmosis from the first hit, 10 from the second hit. Now imagine you're getting hit by random damage over times, white mobs are throwing projectiles at you, there's lingering AoE effects, all that goes into osmosis, so it can grow very quickly, and since it gets affected by your healing modifier, if it's small amounts of damage, it's actually just healing you. I hope that makes sense. Either way, the important part is that this talent is ridiculously strong. If you get lucky and find either a high block unique shield or just a random high tier shield from a vault, you basically become invincible early on, out-healing all damage. At level 3, if the damage you take is twice as high as the percentage block value, you even have a decent chance to remove a physical debuff from you. Okay, so what's the downside? Well, sustaining this talent constantly drains your Vim by 3. That's not a lot, but it means you can't just permanently have this on, as Vim doesn't regenerate. But it's low enough that you can permanently have this on in actual combat, and it activates at instant speed, so you never have to spend a turn for it. I recommend just setting this to autocast when enemies are visible, and late game, once you get Vim regeneration from Demon Seeds, autocast when available. There's also this line, the damage increases with spell power. I have no idea what that means for this talent. I'm 99% sure it does not increase the percentage shield block value. Maybe it's a remnant of the old Demonologist, since this class was reworked. A Hardened Core is a sustain which increases your armor and gives you spell power. It's decent, worth 2-ish points. Demonic Madness hits everyone around you with your shield for darkness damage, confusing your foes. This is a 50% confusion effect, so really good. At level 4, you also automatically block at the end, so what is there to say? Put 4 points in this. Blighted Shield is a passive, which curses enemies you apply Counter-Strike to. This curse reduces all their damage by 25%-ish at max rank. This is really good. I like taking 1/4 less damage. Worth maxing eventually. And now there are 2 locked categories. First is Doom Covenant. Dark Rain is a passive that gives you a 20% chance to get 8% all damage affinity whenever you deal darkness damage with your spells. This is unfortunately pretty hard to do, but as I learned from Helmin Thauge, the description is yet again a lie. This works on any darkness damage. So if you have simply +5 darkness damage on your weapon, it can trigger Dark Rain when attacking. Now this is a lot more doable. You can get this to stack up to 5 times, so up to 40% all damage affinity. It's very difficult to die if you reach that, as with some resists, most damage will just be healing you. You just become the ultimate tank, and I love that idea, since in Tome usually the best defense is offense, but if there was ever a class to go full turtle mode on, this one is it. Stacking it is not that easy, 20% is not a lot, and while this class lets you convert damage to darkness, you always have to pay some price for it, so it's definitely not a must-have, but I still think it's pretty awesome. Dread End creates a pool of darkness around an enemy when you kill or deal a lot of non-darkness damage, while Dark Rain is also active. This helps a lot with stacking Dark Rain once you get the first proc. That one really is the most crucial. Just a 1-pointer, unless you are running some wild darkness damage build. The extra life is definitely not worth 2 extra points. Blood Pact is an instant speed talent that lets you pay 10% of your current life to get a 100% darkness conversion for just 1 turn. That's not very impressive, but what's good about this talent is that it also recovers stamina and Vim if Dark Rain is active. Since you struggle with stamina in the early game, I thought this would be perfect for solving that, but by the time you would get to put points into this talent, you get access to Demon Seeds, which give you huge Vim and stamina regeneration, so this is no longer really needed. Erupting Darkness makes your pools of darkness erupt into volcanoes, dealing fire and physical damage. It's instant speed, which is good, but seems pretty clunky. You don't want to have your damage talent be locked behind 10 different other steps you have to take first. I don't think this is any good. Then there's Spellblaze. Rain of Fire is a sustain that drains 4 Vim per turn, but each turn fires 2 meteors at your enemies. The damage shown, for some reason, is for both of the meteors, so one meteor only does half of this damage. But it's still pretty good. Compare it to Erupting Darkness, and it's obvious this is just much better once you get the Vim regeneration seeds. The meteors don't fall randomly, as the text sort of implies. It targets enemies in radius 2, so it's not bad if you're doing these damage types. Only Ashes Left is a passive that automatically starts doing darkness damage to enemies when you bring them below 33% life. This is pretty useless. Once they are that low, they're likely dying that turn or the next, so at the best this can maybe trigger Dark Rain sometimes. Shattered Mind is why you go into this tree, as it's a sustain which lets you debuff enemies on block, significantly reducing their saves and giving them an up to 25% chance to fail talents. Simply very good. Imagine how annoying this effect would be on you. It would be a must cleanse. Very worth the 5 points. Tail of Destruction is another sustain which applies Bane of Confusion or Blindness in a decent radius when you kill a creature. The Bane also does a bit of darkness damage, so again can help with Dark Rain. Blind and Confusion are both great effects, so this is worth at least 2 points for the extra radius. There are not many generic trees for the Demonologist. There's Survival, where you want Track, and if you want to try out Device Mastery and how it feels, this class is it, since you'll have a lot of extra generic points, unless you take an Escort generic tree. Then, Torment. Willful Tormentor passively gives you more max Vim. This is not necessary. You get 4 max Vim per level, and that's all you really need, even running all the sustains. And that's kind of the story for this entire tree. It's borderline useful talents that you normally probably wouldn't take, but might put some points in since you have nothing else to use them on. Bloodlock is an instant speed talent which makes the targets unable to heal above their current life. See, that's what I mean. This can be very situationally useful, but it's unlikely you'll ever need this talent. Overkill is a sustain, which makes overkill damage explode in a small radius as blight damage. So this helps with AoE, which feels decent. In the late game, you can get the explosions to be pretty big. Blood Vengeance is another sustain, which has a chance to reduce your cooldowns when you take big hits. This is worth running purely as a shield against sustain removals, because you really don't want enemies to strip your Osmosis shield, for example. I doubt you'll ever notice the effect though. Black Magic is here, so we at least have somewhere to put generic points. Bleak Outcome is a sustain that applies a stacking debuff on enemies when you deal Darkness, Fire, Acid or Blight damage, which then increases the amount of Vim you get when they die. You'll eventually want to max this to be able to get 11 stacks because of Weakened Soul, which passively reduces enemy resistances by 2% per stack of Bleed Outcome, up to 11, so minus 22% to every resistance. This is not penetration, so it can go into negative resistance, so it's always useful. Pretty good. Grim Future consumes up to 11 stacks, dealing darkness damage and increasing your spell power per stack consumed. I don't think this trade-off is worth it at all. The damage is pretty low and 44 spell power is nice, but I'd rather take minus 22% resistances. You can't even apply new Bleak Outcome stacks while this is active. Ominous Shadow makes you turn into a shadow for 1 turn per stack consumed, converting 100% of your damage into darkness, but also giving you darkness penetration and damage increase equal to your highest. So this is actually really cool, because unlike Blood Pact, this will make your darkness damage really powerful, and it works with many things in Demonologist's kit. All the little darkness damage over time effects, Dark Rain obviously. But the problem is, why? Why go through that trouble? You first need to stack Bleak Outcome, which is 1 stack per turn, so you'll transform maybe turn 4 of combat for 4 turns of this effect. I really wanted to make this the focal point of my build, but in the end I realized I just want the minus resistances from Weakened Soul instead. Maybe there are some unique items that really make this worth it, but on its own, I don't see it. So here's Maj'Eyal, straight from the final boss, and this time it was really close. I died in high peak on one of the first or second floor. I got basically one shot, and I had to use Blood of Life, and then fought for like 30 minutes, one really tough enemy. And then the final boss, I was stuck in a spiral of just getting debuffed, and managed to just about kill the boss while being blinded. I was getting disarmed for like 15 turns, but I managed to cleanse the disarm through Osmosis Shield, and while blinded I was able to finish the boss off. So it was a little too close for comfort, but I did it, so I'm here to talk about it now. As always, these are the add-ons that I use, none of them affect gameplay, and if you're new to the game, don't worry about it, you don't have to use them. And before we get into the specifics of this character, let me tell you a story about my first character. It was an ogre demonologist. I was having a great time, clearing the dungeons, everything was going great. And then I hit level 18, I think it was even still in the tier 1 dungeons, in the Heart of the Gloom. I pressed my Rod of Recall, and that was the game-losing, run-losing mistake. You see, when you begin in the demon area, you will eventually have to face the Anteroom of Agony. Starting from level 18, you get an increasing chance every level to teleport into the Anteroom of Agony when you press your Rod of Recall. The problem with that is that it's just ridiculously, stupidly overtuned on Insane, and if you teleport in there on level 18, 19, before your first Prodigy, it's basically a death sentence. At that point in the game, your gear isn't that great, you might not be immune to stun even at that point, and especially if you're melee and you rely on being able to hit your enemies, it's just by far the most difficult zone you will have to face in the entire game. It felt basically impossible for my character when I got teleported there on level 18. You can't even get out of that zone. To get out, you need to kill a boss, so even though I managed to sneak through the first part of the zone, I just got hunted down by a unique in the second one. It was just pretty hopeless. So if there's one thing you should take from this guide, it's do not press your Rod of Recall after level 18. Wait until the first Prodigy, which should give you a significant power boost enough so that you can take on this special zone. Or, if you think that's annoying and you don't want to do that, there's another option. And that is to go Drem. Because Drem don't start in the demon zone, they start in Kroshkur in their special dungeon, which completely skips the Anteroom of Agony. And it's generally just not a bad race for this class in general, but I'm skipping a little ahead. So what I've tried to do with this build is I basically wanted to make the tankiest character possible. So I took and maxed out all the defensive talents, and I just wanted to permanently be blocking, outlasting everything, and for my damage to kind of be an afterthought, that I would just kill things eventually, because I just wouldn't die. And for the most part, it's been pretty successful. Since I'm relying on weapon damage to actually kill enemies, strength is the first stat that you should definitely max, as it's what scales your weapon damage. But then you have options. You need magic to put points into a lot of your talents, especially Demon Seed and Bind Demon, which you will want to max as soon as possible. So I recommend going like 30 points into magic, but then it's a bit of a dilemma, because you don't really need that much magic and spell power. Most of your talents don't use it. The most important ones that do is Blighted Shield, which is just the damage reduction on enemies on block, which scales with spell power, but that's mostly it. Shattered Mind does not scale with spell power, that just works by itself. neither does Dark Rain. So I maxed out Cunning second after 30 points in Magic, and then I wanted to go into Constitution for the healing mod, but the problem is the heal mod doesn't only affect Osmosis Shield, it also affects the affinity from Dark Rain. But I was a little worried that I wouldn't have enough spell power to apply the debuffs, like Blighted Shield and Shattered Mind, which would be a problem. So in the end I ended up, after maxing Cunning, I went back into Magic, maxed out Magic, and then put the last points to Constitution. Your other option would be to put some points into Dexterity for the accuracy, and it also obviously improves Riposte and gives you more crit, but since the counter strikes reduce defense, it's not really that important, even though I have 65 accuracy, which would normally not be enough. It's not really a problem if you can't hit enemies at the beginning of fights, because you don't want to go on the offense right away. At the beginning of every fight, you need to put your block up. That is the first action you do every time, because without block, you're not actually that tanky. So it takes a bit of time to get used to this. You usually want to rush in and deal some damage, not on this character. You always want to start with block, otherwise you are surprisingly squishy. So for the race I mentioned Drem, which is great for this class, because Frenzy basically lets you block infinitely. Once you get the Eternal Guard Prodigy, you can block for like the first 10, maybe 15 turns, basically long enough that the fight should be over. If you don't have the DLC, you can play a different class. It's not like this build will suddenly stop working. Honestly, the best part about Drem is really that you don't have to deal with the Enter Room of Agony. That's the number one reason. But number two is it's still a great race. Spike Skin is surprisingly pretty good. I usually just put a single point here, because there are just better talents. But since there's nothing in Demonologist, I put 3 points here, and I was surprised at how often it actually was at 3 stacks. Since there is no percentage chance for this to trigger, it triggers every time, it's actually pretty good. And since I went heavy armor, the all resist is very useful. Since with heavy armor, it's a lot more difficult to get all your resistances in order, compared to ropes where you have always some all resist on the armor. You can see that I have only 33% physical resist, 31 arcane nature. Basically with resistances, the way I see it is that 40% is usually, that's like the baseline. When I have a 40% resist, I'm like, okay, I can survive with a 40% resist. But below that, you should feel pretty vulnerable to that damage type. And you can't really ignore physical resist, even though I have 141 armor and 100% armor hardiness. Physical damage is still one of the most dangerous damage types, so I really should have more than 33%, but what can you do? I also want to mention the Drem starting dungeon, which gives you an option to either go do it right away, or if you leave, you only have a certain amount of turns before Kroshkur gets eaten and disappears. And what you can apparently do is like run into Trollmire and rush the boss, get some experience, and then come back, but it's absolutely unnecessary. I promise you, you can beat the boss on Insane on any class. If you are ranged, or if you find a ranged tool like a Wand of Lightning Storm or a Wand of Firebolt, it's pretty easy, as you can just shoot at the boss from range, and the boss does not regenerate HP, so you can just shoot at it, go hide, regenerate, shoot at it, go hide, regenerate, and it will die. If you are melee and you don't find anything, then it's a bit more difficult, as you need to walk up to it, hit it once or twice, and you will have a 50-ish% chance to actually hit it, because it has some defense and you will have no accuracy. So you try to hit it once or twice, and then you run away. Then you regenerate and just repeat until the boss dies. This is a lot more dangerous, since the boss has a bone grab, which pulls you to him and pins you in place, and if he uses that when you are running away, you will probably die. And it will be close, but it's definitely doable. And I think even if you die once or maybe twice, it's still a lot less annoying than having to rush the boss in a different dungeon, in my opinion. So you can definitely do it. For the talents and leveling, it really is pretty simple, as you want to max Bind Demon and Demon Seed as fast as possible. So most of your early points will go into these two talents, although Demon Seed has a bit of a weird level requirement. It goes from 0, 6, 12, 18 to 24. Then there's the question of which global speed talent you want to take first. And I think going Flame of Ururok first works out better, because the sustained Vim cost of 90 is very doable, and you get that permanent 19% global speed, while Blinding Speed costs a decent amount of stamina, which you really struggle with in the early game. I'm honestly not too sure if that's worth it. Maybe you can go for Blinding Speed first, as you don't really need stamina, you can just bump into enemies, but the way I did it works fine. Then I'm honestly still not sure about the Link of Pain. These were my last 3 points. You can see I can still take them out. In the final boss fight I used it on the Paladin and on Elandar and then Argoniel, because they burst her down pretty quick, so I thought it could do some decent work, but I don't know. I'm just not too impressed by this talent. I couldn't help the feeling that maybe if I just put the 2 extra points into Rush for the extra range, and then maybe a point into Twisted Portal, I would just do better. So I recommend testing that out, see what feels best for you. On the generic part of the tree, it's pretty clear cut. You have the luxury of maxing out all the combat training talents, and Device Mastery is actually quite good, especially since for my weapon I used Morrigor, which has the unique ability to swallow the victim's soul on kill, gaining a new power, which means it basically copies a talent from the enemy you kill and gives it to you. And this can be basically any talent in the game. You can reroll these talents, so you're not stuck with the first one you get. And I ended up going for the Ghoul Leap, which is really easy to get. You will face ghouls through the entire game. It shouldn't be too long before you fight a ghoul. And they don't have a lot of talents, so you should be able to get this. And Morrigor, I think it drops in like 50, maybe 60% of my games, so you have a decent chance to find it. So the Ghoul Leap is just basically a teleport. It's why I don't even have a point in Twisted Portal, because if I get surrounded, I can simply Ghoul Leap out. In fact, I can even initiate with Ghoul Leap, because Device Mastery applies to this talent, or to this ability. You can see it requires 8 power out of 13. So when I use it, in 2 turns I can use it again. So if I block and then I make an attack, and then I turn on my Psionic Shield, let's say, I can already use it again to reposition. So I can use it to engage, get a lot of that global speed, then I can use it again to jump out. It's just really strong, and just works perfect with 5 points in Device Mastery. The leveling experience should be pretty pleasant. It's really reliant on if you find a good shield, because if you do, you just basically can't die. So definitely do all the vaults you can find, since that gives you the highest chance of finding a higher power level of an item than your character currently is. And if you find something like Titanic, like I did, which is fairly common, you can use it until the very late game, since even though it doesn't have that great actual stats, all you care about is the shield block value, which is very high and difficult to beat, even for tier 5 random unique Voratun shields. For the Prodigies, the first one, you don't have much of an option. I think basically any kind of Demonologist build will want Eternal Guard, which makes block always last 2 game turns. Right, normally, as soon as you block damage, the block will turn off at the beginning of your turn. Eternal Guard makes it stay up always, which is just really important. And being able to apply Counter-Strike to all enemies is obviously also good. And then for the second Prodigy, you have a few options. I originally wanted to stick to the fantasy of being an uber tank and pick something like Spine of the World or even Draconic Veil, but in the end I took the boring option and I went for flexible combat. Just because I felt like my damage was pretty decent, but it could be a bit better, and since I hit a decent amount of times per turn, I thought flexible combat is a great option. But as you'll see when I talk about my items, I never really managed to find any decent gloves, so this didn't exactly pay off too much. And honestly, I don't think you really need flexible combat. You could definitely take one of the defensive ones, or even Arcane Might, which I honestly kind of forgot about, and it probably would have been better, since I ended up maxing magic in the end. Before we get to the items, I want to talk about the demon seeds that I use. On your main hand, you'll be using Corrosive Slashes, which converts all my melee damage into acid and gives me a lot of armor penetration. Originally, I wanted to use all the acid demon seeds, like the acid bath and the one that spawns acid when you shield block, but in the end I changed all of those on my character and I only kept Corrosive Slashes. You scale this with just an increase to acid damage, by the way. You don't scale physical damage. Then on my offhand, I used Blood Shield. Although you should only take this once you find a shield with a really high block value. Because what this does, it applies 15% of your block value as flat damage reduction against all damage. It also retaliates for some damage when you get hit in melee, but that's not important. I used it purely for the block value, since you want to prioritize shields with high block value anyways. For Osmosis Shield, it felt like a great combo. But in the early game, where you won't have great shields, 15% of 40 is not really that much and it's not worth running. So I think one of the best seeds is this Fire Imp of Hand seed, which you get very early on, and which gives you physical resist, the most important one, but also fire and blight, which is also pretty important, and it also gives you flat damage reduction against those damage types. So that's just really solid to have on your offhand until you can transition into Blood Shield. Then on my body I ran Champion of Urarok, which just gives you a big stat increase, 25 strength, 25 magic and 200 max HP. But you'll only find this in the end game. Before that, I recommend the Blighted Path. This is, I think, a tier 3 or a tier 2 demon, and this basically lets you get an instant speed shield every combat, so just some additional sort of ability. Then on your ranks, you will eventually run these regeneration seeds, because they also give a big stamina regen. All the seeds for ranks help you sustain Vim in some way. And these ones I think are just by far the best once you can get them. But before that, the best ones are just the ones that give you Vim on melee. So you can get 2 of these that give you 3 Vim per melee hit. And since you're hitting a lot, you can get 18 Vim per turn. So that should take care of all your Vim needs, at least in combat. Obviously, it means you cannot sustain your talents outside of combat, which these seeds let you do. Right now you can see I have Osmosis Shield and Blood Shield sustained, even though they drain 5 Vim. I am still gaining 3 Vim per turn, so that's really strong. I can even sustain Rain of Fire, and I'm only losing 1 Vim per turn. So for the items, you want a lot of resistances. And I can't stress this enough, since you're going heavy armor, it will be more of a struggle, but you need to get your resistances in order. Blocking is nice, it's great, but it's all flat damage reductions, but you need to support it with percentage damage reductions through resistances. Wherever you can get it, you should. And then it's the classic of physical crit and crit multi. Also one immunity that you usually don't prioritize, but on Demonologist you should, is Disarm immunity. Since you want to be always blocking, since that lets you hit enemies through Counter-Strike and survive, if you get disarmed, you cannot block, which means you die very, very quickly. So disarm immunity is extremely important, and I underestimated it a little bit. I only have 60% disarm immunity, and it almost killed me at the final boss. So if you can get this to 100%, that would be really strong. Or it is an argument in the favor of Spine of the World, just so you can basically never get disarmed. In terms of the crit, you don't need 100%, because basically all of your attacks will be counter strikes, so that gives you 26% extra. So I can get away with just having 82% crit chance, and I am critting every single time. Then you also want Darkness on melee hits, which will help you proc Dark Rain a lot easier. So you can have that either on your amulet or on your gloves. My cloak looks really awful at first glance. It just gives a bit of fizz crit and some crit multi. But what you don't see is it actually gives quite a lot of resistances, as it increases combat training mastery, which means it increases thick skin by a few percentages. So that's really nice. And every time I found a different cloak and I put it on, and then I looked at my resistances, I just found it really difficult to justify it, losing, 5, 6, 4 percentages on every single one. Felt really bad, so I just ended up sticking with this one until the end of the game. So for my gloves, these are the ones that I ended up with, and they're not great. The disarm immunity and stun immunity are great and important, I needed them, but obviously since I took flexible combat, what's really important is the procs on unarmed hit, and even though these have 3 procs, clinch and takedown don't actually work if you have weapons, so I only get maim. And maim is not bad, it's an attack, but you can definitely find better gloves. What you're looking for is disarm, and there's one other one that basically just give you an extra weapon attack, which is just a great damage increase. But unfortunately, I just couldn't find any of those gloves. Then the rest of my items are in the same vein that I mentioned. A lot of fizz crit, crit multi and resistances. My boots have the Undeterred mod, even though I didn't really need it in the end. I don't need the confusion immunity because I am running Plate of the Blackened Mind, which gives full confusion immunity. And you don't need the silence immunity because if you get silenced, you can still use most of your talents. You lose Demonic Madness and Demon Seed, which are great talents, but they're not important enough that you would need to be silence immune. But hey, at least I get the 20% crit multi. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you won't be surprised that I'm using a Psionic Shield, which just helps you get that bit of extra survivability. Then a surprisingly good Lantern, for only being rare, it's basically perfect, giving a big light increase and a damage mod and respen for acid. My rings are quite weak. This is only a tier 2 ring, it's just the best I could find. Same with this one, that at least gives some damage increase and some resistances. Then for my armor, I had a few options, since I found basically all the good tier 5 heavy armors. I was deciding between the Black Plate, Scale Mail of Kurultar, Chromatic Harness and Plate of the Blackened Mind, and it basically came down to the resistances that I needed. All of them offer slightly different resistances, and in the end I decided that I needed the ones on Plate of the Blackened Mind the most, and also it's probably the best actual armor piece out of those, since it gives you the confusion immunity and fear immunity, which obviously confusion immunity is a bit overkill since I have faceless and 60% from that, but it's still nice to just not have to worry about it and be able to swap out the items, even though I didn't manage in the end. And it also gives the random gloom effect, 20% when you get hit, which can be a slow, a stun, or a confusion, so all of those are great. Then for the shield, I ultimately ended up with a shield that only has 298 block. First I swapped out to this one, which has the same amount of block as Titanic, 320, but it also just has better other stats. But in the end I swapped to Shimmer Obsidian, because it has a comparable block value. The 20 block, it doesn't make that much of a difference, especially for something like Blood Shield. And it gives me 20% acid penetration, which was quite important, as I only had 26% without it, which is not that great. 46% is a lot better, so I thought that would be the best option. It is definitely possible to get a shield that has more than 320 block. There are 2 item egos that give block, but then they also have a pretty big range of how much block they actually give if you manage to roll that mod, and I just couldn't do it. So hopefully you have more luck with that and you can get like a 400 block shield that feel really good. And then for my weapon, as I mentioned, Morrigor is just a great weapon. It scales with strength and magic, so that's another reason why I maxed out magic in the end. It deals arcane and darkness damage on a hit, which helped me with Dark Rain when I didn't have darkness on hit damage. Although, to be honest, you mostly want the darkness on hit on your shield, since that's what you are hitting with the most through Shield Slam and Shield Pommel. But especially since I've never actually gotten to use this weapon, I had a lot of fun with this. For the Inscriptions, it's the same setup that I run every time. 2 Vials, 1 Mental Physical, 1 Magical Physical, a Healing Infusion for wounds, poisons, diseases, a Movement Speed Infusion, which is the best inscription in the game, and Dissipation, just to strip Elandar and Argoniel and any other spooky mages of their sustains. Or, always don't forget you can actually use this on yourself to remove magical debuffs. From the Escorts I managed to pick up Premonition, which is very helpful, gives you some resistances to a damage type before you take damage. If you don't find a talent that you want to take from the Escort, Strength should be the priority. If you can find a Sun Paladin, I still took Chant of Fortress, even though you might think it's overkill, since it gives armor hardiness and armor, and I already put 5 points into heavy armor training, but it's not. I actually needed a little bit of extra armor hardiness, and this even gives 10% physical resist, so it's just a good talent. For the Alchemists, you definitely want class points first, and honestly, you might even want to take physical crit before generic points, since you just really don't have many uses for them. In conclusion, Demonologist is a defensive class giving you many awesome options for building your character through the Demon Seed mechanic, from augmenting your weapons and armor to gaining powerful spells and anywhere in between. It's a lot of fun to experiment with. Next time I'll be talking about one of the more unique summoners in Tales of Maj'Eyal, the Doomed. Unless I die, in which case, who knows. Thank you for all the nice comments. I'm glad people are finding these videos useful, and thank you for watching.